So, you may not have noticed while you were celebrating over the holidays, but Bernie Sanders has officially slipped into the #1 position in the RCP average for New Hampshire. So, let's take a quick look at these numbers here. And so, you can see here Bernie Sanders finally passing up Pete Buttigieg, who has been in the lead in New Hampshire for quite a while now, largely because he was spending a lot of money in New Hampshire, a lot of money on ads. But Bernie Sanders is finally starting to break through on that, and he has really been going up for the past while here. So let's look at the actual numbers here, and I'll make them bigger for you. So we have Sanders at 19, Buttigieg 17.7, Biden 14.3, Warren 13.3, Gabbard 5.7, Yang 4.7, Steyer 2.7, and Klobuchar at 2. Now, I will say it's obviously really, really important for Bernie to win New Hampshire. In all honesty, I don't know what the narrative is going to look like if he doesn't win, especially considering that he won New Hampshire so heavily last time around, and it is right next to Vermont. Really, if Bernie doesn't win New Hampshire, honestly, the path for the nomination for him, I mean, this is the state where, if he's going to do well, he's going to do well in New Hampshire, and if he doesn't do well in New Hampshire, it won't look good for him at all. Now, I do want to say about this poll, I don't want to be sort of a downer here. But this is one of the limitations of polling aggregators. So if you actually look at the most recent poll here below, Bernie actually isn't in the lead. So you might ask, well, how is it the case then that the publishing of this new poll put him over the top? Well, if you scroll down here, the poll that it was replacing massively undervalued Bernie and had him only at 9%. And so, it's one of those, it's one of those sort of funny positions where the poll that actually put him over the top ended up replacing a poll where he was really, really low. And so even though this new poll doesn't have him at #1, it still puts him over the top in the sort of polling aggregator. So we will have to wait and see, sort of, obviously just see what happens and make sure that he does stay ahead. If I had to bet, I do think that he will. Buttigieg, especially now that he's facing a lot more serious media criticism, I don't think that he's going to be able to maintain that kind of strength. That kind of strength that he has been seeing, especially when you look at the polling numbers, and it shows that Buttigieg supporters aren't particularly attached to him in the same way that Sanders supporters say. That, a very, very high percentage of Sanders supporters, usually anywhere between 60 and 70, sometimes as high as 73 or 74% of Sanders supporters saying that they are definitely committed to voting for him. And so obviously those numbers are really, really important, and especially in a state like New Hampshire, neighboring Vermont. These voters have known Bernie for a much longer time than, especially a Buttigieg. But also you might make the case that, Elizabeth Warren is also going to do well in New Hampshire. Unfortunately, though, she has been sort of sliding in the polls. I mean, I say unfortunately, unfortunately for her, but I think that a lot of the support, it seems to be going towards Bernie. So you can, take that as good as bad, take that as good or bad, but it's certainly bad for her. Now, I do want to say, though, I said that it's super important for Bernie to actually come out and win New Hampshire outright. And one of the best ways for him to actually do that is if he wins Iowa. So we've been talking about New Hampshire, but if you actually look here at Iowa, Bernie is also surging here in Iowa, and that's really important. In fact, I almost can't see a situation where if Bernie comes out and wins Iowa, I see, like, there's almost no way that he doesn't win New Hampshire. And I've said before in a previous video, if you look at the sort of history of since they've had the states voting in this order, any Democratic candidate who has won Iowa and won New Hampshire, every single time that has happened, that candidate has then gone on to actually win the nomination. Now, I will say, just given the breakdown of this sort of election, it is quite possible that that rule might be broken in this instance. But I will say that if Bernie manages to win Iowa, he's very likely to win New Hampshire, because even though the sort of asterisks on how the New Hampshire polling aggregate is right now, with that sort of weird situation of how it's aggregating, obviously Sanders is very well positioned in New Hampshire, and so if he comes out and wins Iowa, he's very likely to win if he wins Iowa, he's very likely to win New Hampshire, and that's going to set him up really, really well, because he's also very well positioned in Nevada. And so I do think that we could see a situation where Bernie wins a lot of the early states and then is able to at least be competitive in South Carolina. I'll be honest, looking at the polling in South Carolina, Biden really is ahead, although some of the more recent polls do show that gap narrowing. But Biden probably will win South Carolina, but if he even just, I mean, if Biden only wins by 2 points, the media narrative is still going to be how Biden is barely holding on, and then going into Super Tuesday, it's going to be quite good for Bernie. So anyway, I just wanted to give you that quick update on the state of the race. So that's the video. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.